Hello, it's time for Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is about cell structure, and in this video we're going to be talking to you about all types of cells and the organelles. So let's not waste any of your time. Let's get right to it. Now when it comes to cells, right off the bat we want to talk about the two types: prokaryotic cells, your bacteria, things of that nature, one-celled, single-celled organisms, and eukaryotic cells, which are multicellular organisms like us, plants, that type of stuff. But each of these will have their own slides, so we'll talk about more about that then. But one thing we do want to establish that there are some things that all cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic, have. And those four you can see listed there beside me there. But they either have a nucleoid or a nucleus or something. What that means is when they say nucleoid, something that contains the chromosomes. They all have cytoplasm. Cytoplasm, again, it'll have its own section in the video, but cytoplasm is that material that all the organelles or everything within the cell kind of resides in. We'll talk about it then, but you can think packing material, whether it's paper, shredded paper, packing peanuts, styrofoam, however, but they just kind of nestle into that to keep them safe. Ribosomes. Okay, ribosomes are a huge, important organelle. They're the ones that make the proteins. But again, we'll talk about those in their portion of a video. And they all have a membrane around the cell. And of course, that has a couple of names. And if you've had me in class, you know my thoughts on multiple names of the same thing. But that is what it is. So you can read plasma membrane or cell membrane. Those are the same things. And of course, a cell is a basic unit of life. Below me you can see the two types of cells, a cartoon image, the prokaryotic cell on the right, eukaryotic cell on the left. Again, prokaryotic cells, bacteria type things, eukaryotic cells, animals, plants, and everything like that. Okay, again, we just talked about there are two types. Prokaryotic cells do not have a true nucleus. Okay, eukaryotic cells do. Prokaryotic cells do not. Prokaryotic cells don't really have distinct organelles. They have very few things in there. If you're a bacteria cell, your really only purpose is to infect a host and dump your DNA into their system and let their cells start manufacturing to create more bacteria cells. Eukaryotic cells, they do have a membrane-bound nucleus, a true nucleus. The organelles are membrane-bound, and of course animals, plants, fungi, protists, that kind of stuff are the examples. Okay, now when we're looking at prokaryotic cells, very simple organisms. I mean, you're a bacteria cell. There's not a lot going on. I mean, they are super powerful organisms, but one cell, unicellular, not a lot going on in there. As I mentioned, they don't have a membrane-bound nucleus. The DNA is in the nucleoid. You can see it's kind of the top of that picture. It's just kind of free-floating inside of a little container. Don't have a lot of membrane-bound structures inside. But what they do have is a cell wall, and it is a super powerful force. If you take a microbiology class, I mean, you'll spend weeks talking about the different variations of the cell wall and how potent and powerful they are. The entire field of antibiotics is based on somehow overcoming the cell wall and using medicine to break that down. Excuse me. That's the one thing we can attack with with bacteria is their cell wall, because we don't have one. We can't attack D chromosome. We can't attack that kind of stuff, cytoplasm, ribosomes that bacteria cells have to try to kill them, because we have those. We'd be attacking our own. But that cell wall, pretty powerful. They do have ribosomes, as I mentioned, because they got to make some proteins to get everything done. And the two main types of prokaryotic cells, bacteria and everything else is in the archaea, or ancient kind of a line, but mostly just bacteria. Okay, continue with prokaryotic cells. We talked about the cell wall. It's a strong cell wall. Peptidoglycan is the main component of that, and it's strong not just because of the material, but if you were in a microbiology class and were taking a look at the pictures, it's super reinforced. It's multi-layered as far as construction. I mean, it's taking steel beams and crossing them and wrapping that in iron, and it's pretty strong. But that cell wall has lots of functions. It maintains the cell shape, prevents excessive H2O uptake. Yeah, it's just really strong, really protects them, and antibiotics are designed to break that down, in essence, and then killing. And it also has a capsule on the outside, which makes it even more fortified. It's a gelatinous kind of covering, so first you got to get through that. Not all bacteria cells have this. In a microbiology class, to test to see what kind of bacteria it is, typically you're doing things with the cell wall, staining it to see it, and if it stains a certain way, it's got this structure, and if it stains a different way, it's got that structure, and so you can begin to narrow it down on what the particular bacteria is, so you can get the right antibiotic. Okay, still looking at prokaryotic cells. Now let's talk about motion. Okay, locomotion. Bacteria cells do move around. They've got to get to their host. They've got to get to resources, and they've got a pretty efficient system for moving around. The flagella is what they use, and there are 4 types you can see in the picture below me. If you have one flagella on one end, that's called a polar flagella. If you've got multiple flagella on one end, Lopetrichus flagella, Amphitrichus if you have one on each end, and Pteritrichus if you have multiples on both ends. And you may be thinking, okay, what's the benefit of having multiple? Well, just think if you had multiple arms on one side. Certainly you could do multiple things, but if you think about, if you're familiar with, if you have ever been in a canoe or something like that, or just in a pool, when you want to turn yourself around, you take your arm and kind of move it through the water to turn around, or if you want to go in a certain direction, you kind of paddle in the opposite direction. So you can, if you have multiples, then you can not only turn to direct yourself in a particular direction, then you can go in that direction while at the same time. So it just gives them a lot more mobility, the more flagella that they have. And the picture beside me, you can see kind of the structure. So it's a pretty impressive structure. You can see it's really a series of simple machines. You got wheel and axle. I mean, you got incline, you got planes, you've got just multifaceted stuff, and it just spins. So you can think of like a boat propeller. You got a big bass boat or something, fire that motor up, and that propeller spins, moving you in a particular direction. So if you can move in a straight line and you can guide yourself, you can really go wherever you want to go. Okay, now transitioning to eukaryotic cells. As we've talked about, they do possess a membrane-bound nucleus, much more complex than prokaryotic cells. I mean, in our cells, we have a vast number of organelles and the things that they're doing, because we have to rely on ourselves to get cell division and to recreate everything, whereas a bacteria cell relies on its host cells to do all that. And of course, you have cytoskeleton for support, maintain cell structure, and that's a pretty impressive setup that we're going to talk about in due time. Okay, continuing with eukaryotic cells. To what the picture beside me, that's a kind of a list of all the major organelles, and each of those have their own video. So we'll talk about those. But what we want to kind of talk about is things that animal cells have that plant cells do not. And those two main ones would be lysosomes and centrosomes. They're not found in plant cells. Lysosomes are kind of the garbage men of the cell world. They kind of roam around. If they see debris or maybe an organelle that's worn out or just a protein that no longer works, they simply engulf it, and they've got digestive enzymes, digestive chemicals inside of them that break that down, and then they just take themselves to the cell membrane and release that stuff. Centrosomes are those things that are part of cellular division that they kind of anchor themselves on the edges of the cell and with the microtubules' help, they're the ones that pull the chromosomes towards the edge. They line them up, get them lined up, and drag them around, and they pull them. So you can kind of think of them as like a tow truck with a long chain that's maybe dragging something. They can attach themselves to the microtubules, and the microtubules to the chromosomes, and then they can move those chromosomes around in that manner. And lastly, for this video, plant cell. Again, plant cells, hopefully you're familiar enough with cells to understand that if you're looking at a cell and you see that square, that rectangular shape, you automatically know that you're looking at a plant cell because of the cell wall. It has that shape. Animal cells are circular in nature. That's not true in all sense, but just a general cell, looking at it, circular in nature. But like again, a plant has a cell wall, which animal cells do not. Other things that plant cells have that animal cells do not: the chloroplast, which is the organelle responsible for photosynthesis. They've got plastids. They've got a central vacuole. Animal cells have vacuoles, but they have a lot of small ones, whereas a plant cell will have one large one. Vacuoles are simply storage areas for water mostly, but it does store other resources in there. And a plant cell uses that vacuole to help it stand up. Like if you think about a blade of grass, it doesn't have any skeleton of any kind, but when that central vacuole is full of water, okay, and it presses up against the cell wall, get that turgor pressure, then it creates a pretty rigid cell. And if you stack a bunch of rigid cells, much like you would stack your vertebrae on top of each other, that would enable the plant to stand up. That's why when plants lose a little bit of water and they start to wilt over, it's because that turgor pressure is reducing and they don't have that force to be upright. But you give them some water, and in just a few minutes, the plant soaks that in and refills those central vacuoles, and it's back upright pretty quickly. Well, that's our show for today. A nice introduction into the world of cells. The next time we get together, we'll be talking about the nucleus. We'll see you then.